My mother called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice honey-sweet in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Sweetheart, I need you to come over this weekend. We need to have a little talk." A little talk. Those four words from my mother's mouth were never little. They never meant a casual conversation over coffee or a check-in about how my life was going. From the time I was 12 years old, a little talk with my mother meant I was about to be rearranged, reshaped, guilt, maneuvered into doing something that benefited everyone in that house except me. I'm Claire. I'm 34 years old, a contracts analyst for a mid-sized logistics firm, and up until 18 months ago, I was the most reliable, most taken-for-granted member of the Harmon family. I showed up. I helped. I stayed quiet. I absorbed. I gave and gave until I was hollow, and then I gave some more because that's what good daughters do. That's what my mother had spent 34 years teaching me. But that Saturday, the day she sat me down at her kitchen table with that rehearsed look of concern on her face, was the last time Margaret Harmon would ever manage me. Because I already knew exactly what she was going to say. And I had already made sure it was too late. Let me tell you about the Harmons so you understand what I was walking back into that morning. My father, Gerald, was a quiet man by nature. Not gentle, just conflict avoidant. He had a talent for being physically present and emotionally absent at the same time, a skill he'd perfected over 36 years of marriage to my mother. He worked in municipal planning, came home, ate dinner, watched television, and deferred every family decision to Margaret without a single visible internal conflict. I used to think he was just tired. Later I understood he had simply chosen comfort over courage and had never once looked back. Then there was my brother, Derek. 3 years older, perpetually in some kind of crisis that required everyone else's resources. Derek had the particular gift of charming people just long enough to extract what he needed before disappearing. He dropped out of 2 colleges, started for businesses that never passed the idea phase, borrowed money from every family member within reach, and still managed to be my mother's absolute favorite, the sun around which our entire family orbited. Every holiday, every family dinner, every financial conversation eventually circled back to Derek and what Derek needed, and how we were all going to help Derek this time. My role in this family had been established early and clearly. I was the responsible one, the capable one, the one who didn't need anything because she always figured it out. When I was 16 and needed braces, my mother said we couldn't afford it. 3 months later, she co-signed a car loan for Derek. When I got into a good university, my parents celebrated for about 48 hours before redirecting their energy toward Derek's latest catastrophe. When I graduated, no one came to the ceremony because Derek had gotten into a fender bender that morning, and my mother felt he needed her there. I had learned not to feel hurt by these things. Or rather, I had learned to bury the hurt so deep and so efficiently that I'd almost convinced myself it wasn't there. Almost. The thing about being the dependable one in a family like mine is that your dependability becomes a resource. They don't see you as a person with needs and limits. They see you as infrastructure. Reliable, load-bearing, always available. And when infrastructure holds up under pressure, nobody says thank you. They just add more weight. The incidents, when I look back on them now, form such a clear pattern that I'm almost embarrassed it took me so long to see it. The first one I can point to is 7 years ago, when our grandmother, my dad's mother, Nana Ruth, passed away. She had a small but meaningful estate. A house, some savings, a few pieces of jewelry she'd promised verbally to various grandchildren over the years. She told me personally, on more than one occasion, that her pearl earrings were for me. Not Derek. Not some cousin. Me. She said I had her eyes. After the funeral, my mother pulled me aside and explained, in her most reasonable voice, that it would be better if the earrings went to Aunt Patricia, because Patricia was going through a hard time, and the gesture would mean so much to her. I stared at my mother. I started to say something about what Nana Ruth had actually wanted. My mother tilted her head and said, "Claire, don't make this about you." I gave up the earrings. 2 years later, I lent Derek $8,000. He'd called me crying, genuinely crying, saying he was behind on rent and his landlord was threatening to involve a collections agency. I had the money in savings. I told him I needed it back within a year. He said, "Of course, Absolutely, without question. My mother called the next day to thank me and told me I was such a good sister. That was the last conversation anyone in my family ever had with me about those $8,000. When I brought it up 14 months later at a family dinner, my mother looked at me as though I had said something in a foreign language. Derek's been struggling, Claire. You know that. We don't keep score in this family. I looked around the table. My father was studying his plate. Derek was refilling his glass. No one met my eyes. Right, I said. Of course. But the third incident, that one cut differently. I'd been seeing someone. His name was Paul, and he was the first person I'd been genuinely happy with in a long time. Calm, funny, thoughtful. He came to one family dinner, just one, and afterward my mother called to tell me she had concerns. Paul wasn't ambitious enough. Paul seemed distracted. Had I noticed the way Paul chewed? She just didn't want me to waste my time. She was saying this because she loved me, obviously. 2 months later, I found out through a cousin that my mother had privately told Paul, had actually called him and sat him down, and told him that I had emotional instability issues and that he deserved someone more settled. She never mentioned it to me. Not once. Paul. And I fell apart slowly after that, in the way things fall apart when someone has quietly poisoned the well. When I eventually found out what she'd done, I confronted her. She didn't deny it. She said, "I was protecting you from making a mistake. One day you'll thank me." I said nothing. I smiled. And I went home and sat in my apartment for 2 hours thinking about what it meant to have a mother whose love was just control, wearing a softer costume. The breaking point, when it came, arrived in an envelope. 8 months ago, my father's aunt, Aunt Cecilia, a woman I'd visited regularly for years, brought groceries to, driven to doctor's appointments, passed away at 81. She had no children. She'd always been fond of me in a way that felt different from the performance of fondness I was used to in my family. Genuine. Uncomplicated. I didn't know Cecilia had any meaningful assets. She lived modestly. But it turned out Cecilia had owned a small rental property for 30 years that had quietly appreciated, and she had a savings account that reflected a lifetime of careful living. She had also, it turned out, updated her will 2 years before she died. I found all of this out not from a lawyer, and not from my parents, but from Derek, who called me on a Thursday night with an edge in his voice I didn't immediately recognize. "Did you know about Aunt Cecilia's will?" he asked.
What? No.
Why? Because apparently she left you everything. The property. The savings. All of it. Silence. Claire, did you know about this? Derek, I had no idea. He hung up. And within 20 minutes, my mother called. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't ask how I was feeling about losing Cecilia. She launched directly into the point, her voice already carrying that particular tightness that meant the pleasant surface was being held in place by considerable effort. "We need to talk about what Cecilia left. As a family." There it was. "Mom. Not over the phone. Come Saturday. We'll sit down together." I agreed. And after I hung up, I sat very still in my kitchen for a long time. Because I had spoken to a lawyer 3 days earlier. I had already received the full accounting of what Cecilia had left me. I already knew the numbers. And I had already begun to understand exactly what Saturday's little talk was going to be about. They wanted the inheritance, not a portion of it. From the way Derek had spoken, from the way my mother's voice had sounded, I understood with perfect clarity that they had already decided, among themselves, before calling me, that this money belonged to the family, to Derek specifically, and that my job, as always, was to agree. For the first time in my life, I felt something cold and clear settle over me. Not anger, not hurt, something more like resolve. I had spent 34 years being the family's infrastructure, quietly absorbing every slight, every redirection, every gentle manipulation. Not this time. I called my lawyer back that same night. Her name was Karen Osei, and she was exactly the kind of person I needed in my corner, precise, unimpressed by sentiment, and deeply familiar with family disputes over estates. When I explained the situation, the history, the patterns, the imminent family talk, she didn't seem surprised. This is more common than you'd think, she said. Someone finally treats you the way you deserve, and the family immediately organizes around preventing you from keeping it. We went through everything. Cecilia's will was airtight. She had updated it with full legal guidance. I was the sole beneficiary. There was no ambiguity, no leverage point, nothing my family could legally challenge. Whatever my mother was planning to say on Saturday, she had no actual power over what Cecilia had chosen to do with her own estate. But Karen advised me on something else, too. If there's a history of financial requests, loans, pressured gifts, you may want to document what you can before this conversation happens. Not for court, just for your own clarity. So that's what I did over the following days. I went through old texts. I found the messages where Derek confirmed the $8,000 loan and promised repayment. I found the message where my mother told me the pearl earring situation had been for the best. I pulled together a quiet, private record of the pattern, not to wave it in anyone's face, but to hold on to it myself. To remember, when I sat down at that kitchen table, that my perception of my own life was accurate. That I wasn't being dramatic. That I wasn't imagining it. I also did something I hadn't done in years. I called my cousin Diane, my father's sister's daughter, someone who had always existed slightly outside the family's gravitational center, and told her what was happening. Diane, who had watched the Harmon family dynamics from a careful distance her whole life, listened quietly and then said, "Claire, please don't give them a single dollar." It meant more than she probably knew. By Friday night, I felt, for the first time in a very long time, prepared. Not just for the conversation, but for whatever came after it. I had spoken to a financial advisor about protecting the inheritance. I had drafted a budget for the property. I had even looked at what it would cost to rent an apartment in a different part of the city, a quiet acknowledgement to myself that after Saturday, things were likely going to change. I drove to my parents' house the next morning with the windows down and the radio off. My mother had set the kitchen table with coffee and a plate of pastries, which told me everything. Margaret Harmon did not put out pastries for difficult conversations. She put out pastries for negotiations she expected to win. Derek was already there, sitting at the far end of the table. He looked tired and a little defensive, which was his default state when money was involved. My father was leaning against the counter near the window, coffee in hand, already performing his traditional role of being present without participating. My mother sat across from me and folded her hands on the table. "We're so glad you came," she began, and I noticed immediately that she said "we," already framing this as a collective, already pulling the family unit around her argument like a shield. "Of course," I said. I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug and waited. She started carefully. Cecilia had been a wonderful woman. Such a tragedy to lose her. We were all grieving. The family needed to be there for each other in times like this. And Cecilia would have wanted. Here came the construction I'd been expecting. Cecilia would have wanted what was best for the whole family. I nodded slowly. "What exactly are you asking, Mom?"
She paused.
She wasn't used to me skipping the runway. Derek leaned forward. "We think it's only fair that the inheritance gets split." Cecilia didn't understand the full picture of everyone's situation when she made the will. She probably didn't know about. "She knew," I said quietly. Derek stopped. "I visited her every 2 weeks for 6 years. I continued. I took her to her cardiologist. I sat with her after her hip surgery. I brought her groceries and helped her manage her medications and drove 4 hours round trip during a snowstorm because she had a fall and didn't want to call 911. I let that land for a moment. She knew exactly what she was doing. My mother's expression shifted. The careful warmth dissolved, and underneath it was something more familiar. The particular look she got when a conversation wasn't going the direction she'd planned. "Claire." Her voice took on that weighted tone. "No one is saying you weren't good to Cecilia, but you have to understand how this looks to the rest of the family. You receiving everything while Derek." "Derek what, Mom?"
I said.
"While Derek what? Exactly?" She blinked. "I want to hear you finish the sentence," I said. "While Derek what? Needs it more? Deserves it?" Because I genuinely like to understand the logic. "You've always been the stable one," she said. "Derek is going through a difficult. He's been going through a difficult time since 2009. I said it without heat, just clarity. That's 15 years of difficult times that our family has funded on his behalf, including $8,000 he borrowed from me that I haven't seen a penny of. Derek's jaw tightened. That was a loan between family. Yes, I said.
It was.
And you've never once mentioned paying it back, and neither has anyone else at this table. My mother drew herself up. I recognized the posture. She was moving from persuasion into authority. This is not about old grievances, Claire. This is about doing what's right for your family right now. I agree, I said. It is about doing what's right. And I've thought about it very carefully. I reached into the bag I'd brought with me and set a folder on the table. Nothing dramatic, just a simple manila folder, placed calmly in the center. What is that? My mother asked. A summary of my conversation with my attorney this week. I wanted to be prepared for today, so I asked for everything in writing. I opened it. Cecilia's will is legally binding and uncontestable. There are no grounds for a challenge. The estate transfers to me in full. My lawyer was very clear about that. The silence in the kitchen was different now. Denser. You went to a lawyer? Derek said slowly. Before coming here, yes. I looked at him. Because I wanted to understand my options before having this conversation. The same way I imagine you all spoke to each other before inviting me over for coffee and pastries. My mother's mouth pressed into a thin line. We're your family. You didn't need to involve lawyers. Mom. I kept my voice level. Every significant conversation in this family ends with me giving something up. The pearl earrings. The money I lent Derek. The relationship you ended by calling my boyfriend without telling me. I watched her face. Did you think I forgot about that? Paul? The phone call you made telling him I had emotional problems. The color shifted in her face. I didn't forget, I said. I didn't say anything, because that's what I always do. But I've been paying attention. Claire, I was trying to protect you. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. I closed the folder. I'm not going to share the inheritance. I'm not going to donate it to Derek's next venture. I'm not going to give it to the family fund or whatever framework feels most comfortable to describe this request. Cecilia left it to me because of the relationship we built together. And I'm going to honor what she wanted. My father, from the counter by the window, finally spoke. Claire, let's not be hasty. Dad. I looked at him, just looked at him, for a long moment. Do you have anything to say to me? Anything, in the last 34 years, that was just for me? Not a redirect. Not a think about your brother. Just something for me. He opened his mouth. He closed it. That's what I thought, I said softly. I wasn't cruel about it. I was just honest. My mother tried one more time. Her voice went softer. The genuinely dangerous register. The one that sounded most like love. Sweetheart. After everything this family has given you, what have you given me, Mom? I asked. I'd really like to know. Specifically. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard in that house. I picked up my bag. I stood up. I love you, I said. I want you to know I mean that. But I'm done participating in a dynamic where my love for you is used to take things from me. I looked at each of them in turn. If you want a relationship with me going forward, it'll be a different kind. Honest. Mutual. Equal. I'm open to that. But I won't be doing this anymore. I left the pastries untouched on the table and walked out the front door. The weeks after that Saturday were strange and clarifying all at once. My mother called 3 times the first week. The first call was angry. She told me I'd embarrass the family and that Cecilia would be ashamed of how I was behaving. I listened to that voicemail twice and then deleted it. The second call was softer, almost conciliatory, asking if we could try again. I didn't return it. The third was from my father, brief and halting, saying he hoped I was doing well. Derek sent a text that said simply, I just want to talk. I read it and put my phone down and made myself a cup of tea. I had expected the silence to feel like loss. It felt, instead, like setting down something I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was weight. The inheritance came through cleanly, exactly as Karen had said it would. The rental property was in better shape than I expected, I met with a property manager, made a few repairs, and had it generating income within 6 weeks. The savings I invested conservatively with guidance. For the first time in my adult life, I had a financial cushion that wasn't connected to anxiety or scraping or hoping nothing went wrong. Cousin Diane became a more regular presence in my life. We started having dinner on the last Sunday of every month, something easy, something consistent. She told me that the family narrative, in the months following my confrontation, had evolved predictably. I had become difficult, then changed, then simply going through something. My mother had apparently told several relatives that she was giving Claire space to process her grief over Cecilia. I laughed when Diane told me that. Genuinely, fully laughed. I also signed a lease on a new apartment, a little further from my parents' neighborhood. More natural light. A small balcony with enough room for 2 chairs and a few plants. I sat out there the morning I moved in with a cup of coffee and felt something I hadn't felt in years, unhurried.
Like the day belonged to me.
It's been 14 months since that Saturday morning. My mother and I have spoken 3 times, brief, surface-level exchanges at 2 family events I chose to attend. She is careful with me now in a way she never was before. I'm not sure if that's respect or caution. Possibly both. I don't need it to be more than it is. My father sent me a card for my birthday this year. Just a card, nothing elaborate. Inside, in his handwriting, it said, "I'm proud of you, Claire." I haven't said that enough. I read it several times. I put it in a drawer. I haven't called him yet. I might. Derek, from what Diane tells me, is in the early stages of a new business idea.
He's found different people to fund it this time.
I wish him well, and I mean it genuinely, but I mean it from exactly the distance I now occupy. What I want to say to anyone listening who recognizes something of their own story in mine is this. The moment my mother said, "We need to have a little talk," she expected me to walk into that kitchen and be who I had always been. Cooperative, accommodating, quietly surrendering. She didn't know I had already spoken to a lawyer. She didn't know I had already made my decisions. She didn't know that her little talk was, in fact, my moment, the one I hadn't known I was preparing for my entire life. Turning the tables doesn't always look like a dramatic explosion. Sometimes it looks like a folder placed calmly on a kitchen table. Sometimes it looks like answering a question with a question. Sometimes it looks like standing up, picking up your bag, and walking out the door while the coffee is still warm. I have a life now that is genuinely, quietly mine. I eat breakfast on my balcony on Sunday mornings.
I call Diane.
I manage my property and my savings and my own choices without asking anyone's permission or bracing for the redirect. Nana Ruth's pearl earrings are gone.
Paul is gone.
Years of effort I poured into people who returned it in fractions are gone too. But I am still here. And for the first time in 34 years, that feels like more than enough.